Hi guys, welcome to Rathwulven Bushcraft. Today we're in the Noordladerbos in the Netherlands and we're gonna talk tea. Because as you can see, there are a lot of conifers around here. Some can be used for bushcraft teas, others don't. So if you want to learn something about that, come with me. Here we have the first tree that we can use for teas. This is a spruce. If you come closer, I will show you how to identify the tree. If we take a look at the twigs of the spruce, we can see that the needles are not growing in a bifaced pattern to the left and the right, but rather all around the stem or the twig. If you take a close look, also up front here, you can see that they are basically growing all the way around into all the different directions. Another characteristic of the needles is that they're very stingy. So if I put my hand around it like this and I press a little, I can feel it stinging like tiny needles. Because the needles are very hard, they're not really bendable and also break easily and are very stiff and pointy. Another great characteristic can be seen here on the main branches. Also, the main branches are usually covered in needles before they feather out into the tiny twigs with all their needles. Also interesting to recognize is that spruces have a very straight growth pattern, as you can see here. There's barely any crooked shape in the main stem. Usually they just go straight up. Another characteristic of the spruce tree is the smell of the needles. If we take a couple of them and rub them in between our fingers and then smell them, we get a smell that is kind of like grassy, like fresh cut lawn, but also combined with the smell of pine resin. If you might know that from fatwood, for example. This way you can easily identify whether you're dealing with a spruce, which can be used for tea. Here we have a nice specimen of a broken down pine. Probably this one has been falling throughout the last thunderstorm we had here. But what's nice to see right here are the needles, which grow in pairs of two. I don't know if you can see this properly right here, right where my index finger is. But for one nodule, there's two needles growing out. They also have very long needles, so they can be easily identified. And you might want to use them as a tea. I have to be honest, they don't really taste like anything. A little greenish like grass, so they're not particularly spectacular. But they can give you a vitamin C boost if you really need it. And the reason why I'm also showing you this tree is because this is a great example of how you could harvest. Because the tree is dead, it has been falling down already. And as you can see, there's nothing that can save this tree, but the needles are still fresh. So if you guys go out there and you harvest tea, look for these kind of broken trees. Don't harvest from living trees if you don't have to, and we're all good. Here we have another broken pine tree right here. Again, if you look at those needles here, growing in clusters, again with very long needles, two needles growing out of one nodule, internode. And also, something that I didn't tell you already, again also if you look at the stem, it's a stem that has these type of scales on it. and no needles, so this is also a great way of how to distinguish it from other trees. Also very interesting about it is that, as you can see, it doesn't really grow in a straight line and doesn't have a main stem, but it just feathers out into different directions, like here, so you can't really confuse it with other trees. Here we have another great tree for making tea. This is the Douglas fir, and I will show you the characteristics in a second with close-ups. But this tree is my favorite when it comes to making bush tea, because it has a very sweet and aromatic taste to it. So if we take a look at the Douglas fir, it can be confused with a spruce, right? Looks kind of similar if you don't know where to look. But it's pretty easy to identify those, because if you take a look right here, we can see two white lines on the bottom of the needles. Hopefully you can see this on camera. So it gives a rather whitish, blue-greenish shine to the needles. A difference to the spruce is that if I do this, I'm not getting stung. It's more like touching a weird type of fur. It's very smooth, almost feels like a very, very stiff feather or like a brush, but it doesn't hurt. Another strong characteristic of all fir trees, especially the Douglas fir, is the smell of the needles. If we take needles of the Douglas fir and also rub them between our fingers and smell them, we get the smell of mandarins or the smell of lemons. It has a very, very citric aroma to it. For the Douglas fir, this is really distinct because those are more like limes in the way they smell. Other fir trees might smell like mandarins, oranges, anything that goes in the citric direction. So if you have this smell, you can be sure that you're dealing with a fir. But there are even more characteristics. If you take a look at the stem of the Douglas fir, you can see all these tiny little bulbs everywhere, and if you press them with your fingernail, resin comes out. This is typical only for the Douglas fir, just as the very dark grey greenish color of the stem. This way you can easily distinguish it from other firs and also the spruce, of which I will show you the stem right now. Right here, in comparison to the Douglas fir, the spruce also covered in needles, as you can see right here, with a very distinct brownish color. Alright, completely out of topic, we just found this nice plain here, and I want to show you something. If you take a look right here, all the way down there and here and then just like this, there's a deer trail. I don't know if you could spot it one more time. Right from here down there and then all the way here and also behind me just all the way to the back is a deer trail that indicates where red deer is traveling. So if you find these, just try to avoid them. Don't go all too far into the more dense forest over there then, because they might have their resting place there. And pick your campsite respectively, right? Also a fir. I'm not quite sure which one. Could be a white fir, but it's too dark. The bark is too brown in my opinion. I'm going to research this and put it in the comments below. But what is interesting about this tree, just like with the Douglas fir, we could use the needles for a tea. They also have this citric kind of aroma to it, but a little more sweet. So it reminds me personally more of the taste of orange, or maybe also mandarins. Less like lemons and lime. But again, you can use the needles for tea. Unfortunately, this tree is too high, so we can't get the needles. on we go. Here we have another huge fir. Straight growth. Very tiny needles, as I will show you. Also with this citric smell we were talking about. But if you take a look at it, kind of like looks like a spruce, right? Could also be confused, so also here you might want to do the smell test. One more thing about smelling plants. There are toxic plants or toxic trees with needles. So make sure you clean your hands after you had a Douglas fir that smells like this citric aroma. Because if you would take the yew, for example, and then smell the needles of the yew, you would not recognize that these needles have no smell as far as the smell still sticks to your fingers. Just as a tiny tip. Also very important, don't just look up, also look down, because right here we have the cones of the fir. Usually we refer to these as pine cones, but those are from the fir, of course. And what makes them so distinct is that they are very solid even in winter. It feels like they are very compact and closed off. And the outer part of the scales kind of like feels like your cheese rasp, if you would touch it. Like a cheese rasp made of paper. Great indicator to find firs. This here is interesting because we were just talking about the yew, a toxic plant, and this here is a specimen of the yew. I explained this in other videos too. 1 or 2 tiny twigs like this are enough to kill a human being, even if you just boil a cup of tea from that. So stay off that tree. How do we actually identify this one? Well, the first thing is that if you take a look at those needles, they look very shiny, they're very waxy in their appearance. If you look at the bottom side of the needles, they have this very toxic looking green, like a very light and bright shiny green color, and they do not have those 2 lines on the bottom in the white grey bluish color like the fir tree does, for example. Also very important to understand, usually they grow in a pattern to the left and right, in a bi-faced pattern, so to speak. And the tops of the branches here, the tiny twigs, are usually green. If we go to the more adult branches, they turn brown. And they also have their needles all over that. I would like to show you another thing right here. Give me a second. If you can see this, they are also growing alongside those branches. So this is a very distinct feature on how to identify the yew. Also very important, if we take a look at the tree as such. It's not particularly a tree, it's more like a bush, and it grows into all sorts of directions, left, right, however you would like it to have it. And what also is very interesting about this is that usually the yew, at least in Northern and Western Europe, is not really a native species. It's more found in parks because it's very easy to maintain. So it should be easy to avoid this. Again, don't drink that. Highly toxic. Just wanted to quickly show you that we have a man-made plantation of birch trees right here. This is interesting because we could also use the cambium layer of this birch tree either as emergency food or also for tea. Of course, I'm not going to do this because it's not an emergency situation. Furthermore, we should never take any resources from living plants if we don't need to. So for now we just skip this, but just showing you that this would also be a possibility. Alright, just to have another look. This is what we harvested. A branch like this is good enough for 1 to 2 cups of teas, so we don't need that much more. This is the spruce. Again, as said, very stingy, growing all the way around the twigs. If you look at the bottom, 2 white lines across the needles. And the Douglas fir, very smooth, not at all pointy. Also kind of like growing all the way around, also with 2 white lines on the bottom. What you can also see right here. New shoots coming out, usually a good indicator. This is also good for 1 to 2 teas. Remember those 2, they come in very handy. Okay guys, I'm going to wrap it up from here. I hope you could learn something today. Next time if you go out into the forest, just have a look around, get to know the different types of trees. Please also do not experiment with any sort of tree you do not know. It can be dangerous, you can intoxicate yourself. Always stay safe and have a good time outside. We're going to pack up our stuff because the rain is hitting us and head home, also to have a nice cup of tea. I hope I'll see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe and have a good one. Ciao!